Welcome to Move the Chains with Jonathan Rivers. Here's your host, Jonathan Rivers.
And let there be football. Welcome into the show. I'm your boy, Jonathan Bam Rivers. And the more I sit here and anticipate the arrival of the college football season, the more I get excited. I think 2024, for a variety of reasons, is going to be one of the best seasons in the last 20 to 25 years when it comes to college football. The Georgia Bulldogs, I think, are primed to go on another championship run. And I'll give you all the reasons why I feel that way. Plus, as you always know, in second hour, we're going to our social media questions. What do you think is the biggest question mark I have about the Auburn Tigers? We'll discuss that and more. And in my nonsense narratives, everybody talks about scheduling, but I don't think people understand why it's so very important. Because a lot of times it's not just about who you play, it's about when you play them. And lastly, I'm going to tell you something that everybody already knows. The SEC will cannibalize itself, but it won't just be because of the schedule. All that and more right here on Move the Chains. But you know what we do as always. Let's kick it off with first down. Let's just say this. The Georgia Bulldogs under Kirby Smart have accomplished a few things. In the last 3 seasons, they've got a 42-2 overall record. They've won 2 national championships under Kirby Smart, 2 SEC titles, 6 SEC East divisional titles. Plus, they've got a slew of people in the NFL that have played under Kirby Smart at the University of Georgia. So I don't think there's any surprise when I tell you that they're reloading for another title run. Now, I do want to say this, because when people look at Georgia and they look at the way they recruit and they look at the way they develop, they think it's easy for Kirby Smart and his staff to do what they've been doing. But I want to remind you, because Georgia has so much talent on the top end and also on the third and fourth string when it comes to their depth chart, they're susceptible to the transfer portal in a negative way as well. Because if you're a guy that's going to Georgia and you're a 5-star athlete and you get to Athens and in your first year you understand that you're very good, but there's somebody ahead of you that's a little bit better. There's somebody ahead of you that's a little bit faster. There's somebody ahead of you that's just a little bit more keen and understanding of the scheme and what it is that you have to run. You may find yourself second or third on that depth chart. And if you're telling yourself, I know I'm at one of the premier programs in America, but I can go to another premier program, not just in the country, but in this conference, still have all the TV opportunities, still have all the notoriety, and play early on, why wouldn't you take that advantage? I haven't even thrown in the NIL capabilities for some of these schools. So when you look at Georgia, while they're doing a phenomenal job of building their program through the transfer portal and through recruiting, they're also susceptible to losing people because they're so good and because they have so much premier talent. Now, Georgia, coming into the season, they've lost a lot of people. They had 8 players go in the NFL draft in 2024. 8. Now, of course, this is one of the premier programs in the country, so this is not something that they're not used to. But there are some players to watch for Georgia coming up to this season. This is one of the biggest reasons I think they're looking to reload and go on another title run here in 2024. So let's see that graphic.
I mean, obviously I have expectations for myself, but I'll never, listen to the expectations that other people put on me. Obviously, I have very high expectations for myself, but there's no weight on my shoulders of that. I know what I'm capable of, and I know that I have a team around me. It's not all about me. It's about the team at the end of the day and getting wins. So whatever I have to do that, I'm here for it.
Now, that was starting quarterback Carson Beck. And I don't know if you heard what he said, but he said, it's not all about me. I don't have to do everything. Well, the reason Carson Beck doesn't have to do everything is because he's loaded on the offensive side of the football. Now, a lot of people understand this. Ernest Green, freshman All-American last year, starting at left tackle from the University of Georgia. This is a guy who's a road grader. So what I mean by that is he's phenomenal in the run game, and they've got a phenomenal run game with guys like Trevor Etienne and Robinson in the backfield. But he's also phenomenal in pass protection. If you need him to get to the second level, to get to those linebackers once there's been a double team on a defensive lineman, he can do that. Ernest Green is physical at the point of attack, like all Georgia offensive linemen have been. And remember, this was a team that finished second in the Joe Moore voting, which awards the best offensive line in the country that went to Michigan last year. Georgia won't be far behind. A guy named Benjamin Urasek. He's a transfer from Stanford. Now, this is a guy who will be joining this team in the summertime. But remember what Georgia likes to do. You remember a guy named Brock Byers, who's now in the NFL first-round pick? You know a guy named Oscar Delp, who's on this roster as well? Georgia loves their tight ends. They love to go a lot of 12, which is a 1 running back, 2 tight end personnel. And Urasek, with his experience and his physicality, just adds to that tight end room. Kobe Young is a transfer from Miami. And one of my good friends and former co-host, Josh Pate, who's the host of The Late Kick and who will be a guest on this show in the near future, I asked him, describe Kobe Young in one word. And you know what he told me? Mismatch. And Kobe Young showed that in the spring game. So when you got a guy that's 6'5", 215 that can rub a sub 4.5 40, he's a mismatch because he's bigger than a lot of corners that will try to guard him, and he's a lot faster than most safeties. And when you get him in the red zone, he will be a problem. Tate Ratledge, another offensive lineman that's going to be phenomenal. Mikael Williams, I've seen him play up close and personal. He helped lead them to a national championship in his freshman year. He'll just continue to get better. And I want to talk about Justin Williams and Chris Cole. Glenn Schumann, the defensive coordinator, is also the linebacker coach. These are two 5-star freshmen coming in, one from Texas and Williams and one from Virginia and Cole. And they're both north of 6'1", 210, 215 that can run like crazy, that can play in the passing game, that can intercept the football, and that can rush off the edge. And more importantly, Malachi Starks, who's everybody's All-American, if not the best safety in America, there only have to be one or two that much be better. So when you're talking about Georgia, this is a big reason why I think they're primed for another title run. All right, coming up after the break, I'll answer your questions on social media. We'll be back when we'll move the chains right after this. And welcome back into the show. I first want to take the time to thank everybody who's been watching Move the Chains. I think the feedback has been phenomenal. And later on, we'll tell you how you can definitely watch this, not only on Fox 54, but on YouTube as well. But I definitely wanted to take the time to say thank you for all of our viewers. You've been a big help. You know what time it is. Everybody likes to make their opinion known via social media, especially when it comes to sports, especially when it comes to Move the Chains. So I'm going to give you that opportunity. Let's run it. It's time for second down. All right, so let's go ahead and get the first question up. So Monroe T asks, what is Auburn's biggest question mark heading into the season? Now, Monroe, I'm not somebody who's going to overthink the room right here. I don't like to do that. I think it's the quarterback position at Peyton Thorne. And I want to tell you this. There's a precedent that's been set for quarterbacks transferring into the SEC and having phenomenal second seasons in this conference. Think about Joe Burrow. He transferred from Ohio State, went to LSU. Had an pretty good first year, but in that second year came back, won a Heisman Trophy, led his team to a national championship. Jane Daniels transferred from Arizona State, came to LSU, had a pretty good first season, but nothing to write home about. But then his second season in that system and at LSU ended up winning the Heisman Trophy and turning into becoming the second overall pick in the NFL draft. Does Peyton Thorne have that kind of ability? I don't know. But what I do know is Peyton Thorne has great opportunities, because if you look up and down this roster, not just offensively, but on the defensive side as well, Auburn is littered with transfers. Hugh Freeze understands that if he's going to compete at a high level, he has to use the transfer portal to his advantage. Now, this is a team that's also been top 10, top 12 in recruiting in terms of its top high school players. But when you're top 10 and people in your same conference are top 2, 3, 4, and 5, you have issues. Now, I want you to look at Auburn's potential offensive depth chart here. And I've got the 3 receivers at the top highlighted for a reason. Cam Coleman's, if you don't know the name, you will know the name by the time the season has started. This is a guy who's MVP of the spring game. This is a guy who is only bettered when it comes to his talent by his versatility as a young man, by his character. I know people who know him personally. I've also seen him play personally when he helped lead his high school to the 7A Alabama State Championship last year and to an undefeated season. Keandre Lambert-Smith is a transfer from Penn State who is going to help this offense. And Robert Lewis, the speedster out of Georgia State, is coming to this Auburn fold as well. Jarquez Hunter is a senior running back who got a lot of time as a freshman. So if you're Peyton Thorne, you're not going to have a lot of holes considering your offensive line if they're able to hold up and do what needs to be done. So if you're Peyton Thorne, you have to find a way to be more consistent. You have to find a way to find those holes in the defense and understand whether it's a zone or it's a man defense and take advantage of what the defense is giving you. If you're doing that, Auburn has the possibility of possibly being in the final 2 in an SEC championship game and maybe earning a college football playoff spot. But if not, this would be another season where they've underachieved in my estimation. All right, let's go to the next question. Should teams rely on the transfer portal to build programs quicker? This comes from Jerome. One word, yes. If you don't want to rely on the transfer portal, which we understand is the lifeblood of college football, you're going to suffer for it. Next question. How do you feel about the new SEC conference format, Jennifer F.? Jennifer, you know, it's funny because I came across this earlier on this year, and I like it, to be honest with you. And the reason I like it is because in the past, you've got an SEC West and an SEC East champion. Not a bad thing, but what could you conceivably happen in that scenario? You've got one team that wins their division, but it has 3 or 4 losses, right? So even if they win the SEC, they weren't guaranteed to get into the college football playoff, even though they were a conference champion. Now, we know in the format now with the 12 team, the highest conference champions will get into the playoff. So that's not applicable. But because the top 2 teams in the conference will get into the to the SEC championship game this year, I love it because you could see rematches of teams that you wouldn't have seen in the past if they came from the same division. If Florida and Georgia duke it out this year on the nail biter, we could possibly see them again in Atlanta. So I love the new format. They're going Big 12 style when they've added Oklahoma and Texas. So the top 2 teams will be in the SEC championship game this season. And I'm not mad to see the SEC West go or the SEC East go, because I think this will be a season where this conference, as great as it's been in the past, could get even better. All right, we're going to go ahead and take you to break. And when we come back for the break, you know it's my favorite segment of the show, Nonsense Narratives. We'll talk about scheduling and much more. We'll be back with more Move the Chains right after this. And welcome back into the show. There are a lot of things that people say that kind of get under my skin. And there are a lot of things that I say that may get under people's skin. So what I want to do is I want to take things that people say, and I want to make sure that there's context behind everything. Because I think when we bring up topics and people argue different points, they're not doing it from a contextual standpoint. And I try to bring it to a perspective that we can all grasp. So let's run my favorite segment of the show. It's time for the Nonsense Narratives. Lower thirds will show itself shortly, and I want you to understand what I mean when I say this. Scheduling doesn't matter much in college football. I think this is a narrative that some people may not even know that they have. Now, I'm not trying to paint fans or pundits or other hosts as making it seem as if they're saying that schedules don't matter, like it doesn't matter who you play. It absolutely matters who you play, unless you're Florida State. You were a Power 5 conference champion last year, and you still don't get in because your quarterback gets hurt. That's neither here nor there. My point is, I understand that people understand that scheduling matters, but when I listen to people talk, I don't think they understand why scheduling matters. Because it's not just about whom you play, it's about when you play them. And I've said this from the beginning of time since I learned how to talk and understood football until now. No team is in week 1 what they will be in week 9, 10, 11, and 12. So that's why I don't throw out any Heisman scenarios. I don't throw out any national championship scenarios. I know what teams I think are built to win titles, but they've got to prove it. And this is a reason why every year when Alabama plays LSU, there's a bye week before that game. I want you to understand it because those 2 teams are ultimately physical. We're looking at Auburn right here, and the reason I want to talk about the Auburn Tigers is because this is indicative of why scheduling matters from a when you play a team standpoint, not just from who you play. Because when I look at Auburn's schedule, starting on the 28th of September, they play Oklahoma. They play them at home, right? But then Auburn has something that no other team in the conference has. They have 3 consecutive road games in the SEC. Now, I'm not crazy. I know there's a bye week after Georgia. And if you're Auburn, you should be thanking the SEC schedule makers for giving you a bye week after that Georgia game, because that game will undoubtedly be physical. I don't remember the last time Auburn went into Georgia between the hedges and won a football game. Georgia has owned Auburn recently, and you're in a position where you're going to have your best effort. I talked about it in the last segment from Peyton Thorne and everybody else on that roster to beat Georgia, one of the best teams in college football. But in your eyes, you may say, well, man, Missouri and Kentucky, Auburn's better than them. They have more talent. They've got more transfers. They have Division I talent across the board that can play anywhere. All that's true. But playing Missouri and Kentucky on the road is different after having played Georgia. Bye week or no bye week. So the season will really hinge on what Auburn does in the month of October. I promise you that. Now, another team I want to talk about is the Florida Gators. And listen, from November 2nd to November 30th, no shame November is what I'm going to call this for the Florida Gators. Because while they play every game but one in the state of Florida, and you think that's to their advantage, let's look at the schedule that Florida has coming up in the month of November. I mean, If you're a Florida fan, you're probably saying some things at the TV that I wouldn't appreciate right now, but don't get mad at me. They've got Georgia, then they go on the road to Texas. They play LSU, Ole Miss, and they end the season in a customary rivalry game with the Florida State Seminoles. Let's take a look. Look at this stretch in November. And what Florida has here is no bye week like Auburn had in October. So if you're the Florida Gators and you have any aspirations of getting into the college football playoff, you've got to be in a position to win at least, I think, 4 of these games, if not all of them, based on the way the season plays out. So there is no room for error for the Auburn Tigers in the month of October, and in my estimation, there's definitely no room for error for the Florida Gators in the month of November. All right, when we come back, the final drive. We'll be back with the last segment of Move the Chains right after this. And welcome back into the show. College football wall to wall today. And it's been a phenomenal show. But as we get to the last segment, you know we can't end it but doing it the right way. So it's time for the final drive. The Southeastern Conference has been, and in my estimation for the foreseeable future, will be cannibalistic. The teams in this conference, from top to bottom, when it comes to coaching, when it comes to player development, when it comes to player recruiting, when it comes to analysts, is phenomenal. Do you know that littered on the coaching staffs of these teams are former head coaches that you may have forgotten about, and this is how they're getting retread, and this is how they're going to actually propel into their next jobs? I want you to go back and just look at the Alabamas and the Georgias and the LSUs of the world and see how many former head coaches are on staffs and you didn't even recognize them because you thought that they were out of football altogether. And not only will these teams cannibalize each other when it comes to playing on the field, but it's already happening in in-conference recruiting. Because remember, the rule is if anybody wants to transfer in conference, you've got to do so by February 1st. That's the deadline. And I think one of those biggest transfers, Trevor Etienne, who left Florida to go to Georgia, one of their fiercest rivals, not only made Florida weaker, but made Georgia that much stronger in their run game. And then that red zone offense that I talked about earlier with that massive offensive line and those mismatched receivers that they had. So I can't wait to see the season in all of college football, but especially in the SEC, because there will be no room for error when it comes to what you're doing in week 1 and what you're doing week 6 and what you're doing in week 12. All right, I want to remind everybody that you can not only watch Move the Change right here on the Sports Leader WXTX Fox 54 every Saturday morning, but you can also catch us on YouTube. The channel is at @move_the_change. Make sure you leave a comment. Make sure you leave any questions, anything you have to say about the show. It is welcome. I want to take the time to tell you, everybody, God bless. And until next time, I'll see you later.